Hello to everyone. Welcome to a new chapter of God's answers to life's difficult questions. This is your Pastor Yeti. I hope you had a good, relaxing weekend and starting a new week. May God bless you. How did I get myself into this mess? Samson was a ruler in Israel for 20 years. His story is told at length in Judges 13 to 16. It begins strikingly with an angel's announcement to his sterile parents that he would miraculously have a son, that he would become a judge in Israel. After Samson grew up, he was indeed a judge in Israel for 20 years. The term judge did not mean then what it means today. Samson was a military leader and tribal chieftain. The Israelites' main enemy at that time was the Philistines. This leader had everything going for him: supernatural strength, good looks, and a relationship with God. Yet in spite of that, he was his own worst enemy. He wasted his life and brought all kinds of trouble on himself. Unfortunately, human nature is universal, and we today can fall into the same kinds of traps as Samson. Samson made a mess of his life because he made 3 fatal choices and didn't learn from his mistakes. He typified 3 of the most common ways that we bring trouble on ourselves. If we can identify these 3 traps, we can work out the problems we are in right now and avoid some problems in the future. Learning from our mistakes. First, we are asking for trouble if we refuse to learn from our mistakes. Samson had 2 big weaknesses in his life, and he never learned to control either of them. All of his life, they plagued him, and later they caused him downfall. The first weakness was a bad temper. Samson often got angry. He frequently blew up. A primary motive for his actions was revenge. Samson killed 30 men to get their clothes because he burned with anger. Judges 14:12 to 19. He set a field fire just to get even. 15:3-5. He said to a group of men he didn't like, "Since you've acted like this, I won't stop until I get my revenge on you." Verse 7 on that same chapter in 15. Later he said, "I merely did to them what they did to me." Verse 11. And then he killed another 1,000 men. The other weakness was uncontrolled physical desire. He was physically strong but morally weak. He deliberately ignored God's principles. His life was really a pathetic cycle of failures. He never learned. He kept making the same mistakes over and over again. For him it was really kind of a game. How close to the fire can I get and not get burned? Samson played this kind of game with Delilah, a Philistine prostitute. She kept asking the source of his strength and kept getting teased by Samson, but each time she got a little closer to the truth. He was playing with temptation as he toyed with her, and soon he got burned. But we tend to do the same thing. We say things like, just this one time, to allow ourselves guilty pleasures. What's one time going to hurt anyway? Just this one time, I'm going to worry. Just this one time, I'm going to get depressed. Just this one time, I'm going to try this or that. None of us plans to be a failure. It just comes on us naturally and gradually. It is a step-by-step process. A little by little we become weakened. Our whole life do not fail apart in one day. Do not fall apart. The problem build up over a period of times as we refuse to learn from our mistakes. You may be saying, but this is an area of my life that I have no control over. I am defeated in it over and over again. It is a chronic area of failure in my life, and I just don't know how to overcome it. That's just the way I am. The good news is that God says, I will give you the power to break out of that cycle of failure. When Samson finally faced the facts, God broke his cycle of failure, gave him the power to do what he should do, and gave him victory. God will do that for us when we face the facts. Choosing our friends. The second principle we learn from Samson's life is that we are asking for trouble if we choose the wrong friends. Somebody has wisely said, if you want to soar with the eagles, you don't run with the turkeys. You will eventually become like the people you spend the most time with. That is why it is important to choose your friends wisely. Samson was defeated by bad associations. Even though God has chosen him for a special task, he developed unhealthy relationships, and his friends led him astray. God has a special purpose for each of us, but we get ourselves into trouble when we choose the wrong friends. Here is a challenging question. Do your friends keep you from living 100% for God? Do they tear you down, or do they build you up? Do you find yourself having to comfort the things you don't like to do? The book of Proverbs warns us over and over again about negative associations. Constant exposure to wrong attitudes and wrong values will eventually take its toll in our lives. It is always easier to pull someone down than it is to lift them up. What kind of friends should you have? The kind who bring out the best in you, who lift you up, who encourage you, who makes you a better person. Taking God seriously. There is a third principle in Samson's story, and this is really the most important one of all. Because we see it through his life, we are asking for trouble when we refuse to take God seriously. Samson was careless about his spiritual life. He never did get really serious with God, and this problem showed up in more than one time. In the first place, Samson was always doing his own thing. He lived for himself. His was basically a very selfish lifestyle, and he let his personal desires dictate his actions. Samson lived by the philosophy, if it feels good, do it. God's plan for Samson was greatness, and that is God's plan for you. He has a purpose for your life. You were not put there on earth by accident. But Samson's pattern was carelessness. He just kind of took things. He just kind of took things for granted and never really was serious. And the result was uselessness in his life. After 20 years as a judge, Samson still had not restrained the Philistines, and in the end they did him in. Another sign that Samson refuses to take God seriously is that from all appearances he never prayed about anything, except before his final act, when he brought the house down. Judges 16:28-30. He was impulsive. He was impetuous. He did not ask God for directions. He just went ahead and did whatever he wanted to do. We would save ourselves many problems and spare ourselves much pain if we would just stop and ask God for direction before we jump into something with both feet and get all messed up. Samson turned to God only when he got into a jam. That is what we call foxhole Christianity. Lord, if you will just get me out of this dilemma, I promise I will live for you from now on. Too many people, God is just kind of an afterthought, a convenience. When things get tough and tight, they turn to him in desperation. But when everything is all right, they ignore him. Taking God seriously means paying attention to what he says and seeking his guidance and wisdom every day. Samson never really got serious about living for God until the very end of his life. After everything had finally fallen apart, he was captured by the Philistines. They gouged out his eyes and they made him grind grain at a mile, a job normally reserved for animals. Notice what happened after everything collapsed. Samson finally prayed. 16:28. I wonder what kind of history Samson would have had if he had prayed right from the beginning. Why did he have to wait until everything fell apart before he finally turned to God? The result of Samson's prayerlessness was that he completely lost his potential in life. He was discredited and lost his freedom. He became a slave to the people he had been sent to conquer. Samson truly reaped what he had sowed. God never gives up. This would be a hopelessly tragic story if it just ended there, but it doesn't. The Philistines had cut off Samson's hair, which was a sign of the covenant he had made with the Lord. Samson's hair was just an outward symbol. It was not the source of his strength, but a sign of his strength. When the Philistines shaved his head, it is as if they were saying, Samson, we are changing on the outside what has already been cut off in your heart. You are not really serious about your commitment to the Lord. But notice that the hair on his head began to grow again after it had been shaved. Judges 16:22. The process of renewal was starting. Samson repented and began to pray. As he began to look to God for strength, God honored his desire. God gave him the strength back, and Samson ended his life with an inspiring act of heroism. Samson was brought to the great temple of the false god Dagon, as thousands of his enemies caught, laughed, and joked about him, and also about his God, the true God of Israel. Samson was placed between the two main pillars of the temple, and with every last ounce of strength, God gave him. In answer to prayer, he pushed the columns aside, and the roof of the huge building collapsed killing everybody inside the temple and the 3,000 people on the roof. God had sent Samson to conquer this enemy nation in the first place, and now God was able to accomplish more to Samson in his death than during his life. That is a sad statement on Samson's life, but he finally did defeat the enemy. When God gave him a second chance, Samson had the greatest victory at the end of his life. In a sense, this is a comforting fact. Maybe you feel that you have messed up your life so badly that God will never love you and use you again. But remember Samson. God never gave up on Samson, and He never giving up on you. God sees your potential, and He remembers why He made you. You were created for great things, only as you move into the center of God's will. And can you discover why you were made? But when you do, things will begin to click and fall into place. You will feel fulfilled and will become successful in God's sight as you realize that you are doing what God created you to do. To comfort, the comfort of God's grace. There is something very encouraging about Samson. He is included in God's Hall of Fame. The panorama of people of great faith displayed in Hebrews 11. Why? Because God could take a person who was a total failure in different areas of his life and still uses him for a good and great things. If God only uses people who were perfect, nothing would ever get done. Instead, He uses ordinary people who have imperfections and weaknesses and may even fail in a big way. What should you do if you are a Samson? Exactly what Samson finally did. Turn your life over to the Lord. Give Him all the pieces. And let Him say to you, I will give you the power to break loose from those things that are tying you down and causing your hang-ups and preventing me from working in your life. Only God knows the greatness and potential in your life, and you will never bring it out on your own. God must do it in His strength. Let Him start today. Now let's put our thoughts in action. First, which of Samson's mistakes do you identify with the most right now? And the second one, how do you plan to follow up on God's offer of a second chance? Remember, how much failures you have, how many times you try to get up and says never again, and you did it again. Name it and nail it and bring it to God and let Him be the one who rules your life, not your failures, not you try all over and over again. Let God help you. Don't waste your life. Be an eagle and not live as an example, as we said. If you want to soar with eagles, you can't run with the turkeys. May God bless you, and may He be your guide, and let the Holy Spirit give you the wisdom. And remember, the greatest weakness in your life can be used to show God's strength in your life. God's blessings, and bye.